She finished her last shift in silence, carrying her life out of Chesapeake Mercy in a cardboard box, believing no one would notice she was gone. Then 3 Navy SEALs stepped through the rain, stopped the whole lobby cold, and called her one thing no one in that hospital had ever used by accident, ma'am. This is not just a story about a wounded operator learning to walk again. It is about what happens when war follows you home, when survival feels more like shame than mercy, and when the one person who can pull you back has buried her own scars deep enough to pass for strength. If you have ever smiled through pain, hidden who you used to be, or wondered whether broken people can still matter, stay with me. Watch to the end and tell me where you're watching from. Then, like this video if stories like this still hit something real in you. If stories like this still hit something real in you, stay with me a little longer because before, 3 black SUVs cut through the rain and turned a hospital lobby into a room full of held breath. There was a woman named Claire Donovan trying to make it through another ordinary morning without letting the past step through the door first. Norfolk wore winter with a hard jaw that year. The wind came off the Elizabeth River carrying salt diesel and old coal through the streets. Before sunrise, the city belonged to shipyard sirens, delivery trucks, and service members in dark jackets moving through the half-light with coffee in one hand and somewhere they did not want to be in the other. The waterfront was all steel-gray water and cranes that looked like bent skeletons against the sky. 3 blocks inland. Chesapeake Mercy Veterans Rehabilitation Center sat behind a row of bare trees and sodium lights, red brick damp from the night windows lit in narrow squares against the dark. From the outside, it looked like any other hospital trying to hold broken people together with fluorescent lights and paperwork. Inside, it smelled like antiseptic burnt coffee, wet coats, and the slow, stubborn labor of people who had not given up but had not exactly made peace with staying alive either. Claire Donovan arrived at 5:18, as she always did 40 minutes early, and moving with the kind of precision that makes other people uncomfortable because it exposes how much of their own day leaks away in wasted motion. Navy blue scrubs, white sneakers clean enough to look deliberate. Dark blonde hair twisted into a knot that would not come loose no matter how hard the shift turned. A silver watch, no rings, no perfume, nothing extra. She stepped out of the elevator onto the rehab floor and paused just long enough to take in the stillness. Low strips of light glowed near the baseboards. Through the glass wall of the therapy gym, the parallel bars shone under the dim overheads. Resistance bands hung in loops by color and strength. Wheelchairs waited in a straight line near the lockers. A row of prosthetic legs rested on display shelves in polished silence joints catching the weak light like metal in an armory. Claire unlocked the equipment room and switched on the lights. Her routine never changed. She checked socket liners, replaced 2 frayed Velcro straps, wiped down the benches, recalibrated the cable machine one of the younger therapists had overloaded the day before, sorted morning charts by injury type and appointment time. Below, knee amputations first, spinal injuries next, shoulder reconstructions after that. She liked order because order made pain easier to face, not smaller, just measurable. By 5:36, she was standing at the long window overlooking the river coffee, in a black travel mug worn smooth by years of use. Outside, dawn had not arrived yet. The water looked like a sheet of dark steel under a sky the color of old rope. Tug lights moved far off near the shipyard. Somewhere below, a diesel engine coughed to life. Some mornings the quiet felt sacred. Some mornings it felt like a grave. This one sat somewhere in between. At 5:41, the elevator doors opened behind her. "Donovan, tell me you at least own a bed." Claire took another sip of coffee before turning. Riley Brooks came down the hall carrying a tote bag, her red scarf half on hair, escaping its clip face bright with the sort of easy human warmth Claire had learned to distrust only because it made people say more than they meant to. "I do," Claire said. "I just prefer not to use it when your music choices are waiting for me here." Riley laughed and dropped her tote at the nurse station. You know, most people say good morning first. Most people are inefficient. That is the least romantic thing anyone has ever said before 6 a.m. Claire capped her mug. You should be grateful I am setting expectations early. Riley studied her over the rim of her paper cup. You joke like somebody with state secrets. Claire turned back to the charts before the conversation had time to widen. Riley had a way of making rooms feel softer than they were. She also had the dangerous habit of noticing things. Claire liked her, which was exactly why she kept a certain distance. By 6:15 the floor was awake. Phones rang. Overhead pages cracked through the ceiling speakers. A Vietnam veteran in room 12 argued with dietary over oatmeal. 2 orderlies pushed a gurney toward imaging. Somebody spilled coffee at the main desk and muttered a curse fit for a machine shop. Chesapeake Mercy was not glamorous. It was fluorescent light on tile. It was bad vending machine crackers. It was men learning how to button shirts with one hand. Women relearning balance after blast injuries. It was prosthetic fittings and blood pressure cuffs and insurance battles fought in polite voices over speakerphone. Claire loved the place with a devotion she would never have called love. At 6:27, Dr. Marcus Bennett found her in the chart room. He stood in the doorway with a file tucked under one arm and the expression physicians wore when they were about to hand someone else a problem wrapped in clinical language. You're early, he said. You say that every morning, and every morning I hope I'll someday be wrong. He stepped inside and closed the door. That was what made her look up. What happened? Bennett held out the chart. New transfer from Bethesda. I want him on your caseload. Claire took the file and read the name on the front. Chief Logan Hale, age 31. Navy explosive ordnance disposal attached to special operations support. Left below knee amputation. Torso shrapnel injuries. Mild traumatic brain injury. Psychological resistance to treatment. Multiple reports of verbal hostility. Refusal of assessment. 2 prior facilities. Repeated non-compliance. She turned the page. Another incident report. Another refusal. Another note written by a tired clinician trying to sound objective about a patient who made the entire room tighten up before he even spoke. Bad fit, she asked. Bad everything, Bennett said. Physically stable. Incision is clean. Vitals normal. Healing curve is acceptable. But he has gone through 2 therapists and 3 treatment teams and accomplished nothing except making everyone around him hate entering the room. Claire kept reading. No spouse, no fiancé, no siblings. Mother in memory care. Father deceased. Unit contacts refused. Family support, she asked anyway. None he'll accept. Why me? Bennett leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. Because difficult men tend to stop posturing when they realize you're not interested in soothing them. Because you don't mistake rage for authority. Because every time I give you someone everyone else has written off as impossible, somehow they end up moving. Maybe I'm just stubborn. I am counting on that. He let that sit a second, then added quieter, If he crosses a line, call security. I mean it. Claire closed the file. When does he arrive? Within the hour. When Bennett left, the chart felt heavier than paper should. Claire opened it again, slower this time, letting her eyes move past the surface details into the shape of the man buried under them. 11 years in service. Multiple overseas deployments. Decorated. EOD attached to special operations. That line alone told her enough to feel a cold flicker under her ribs. Bomb techs lived in a world where hesitation had consequences measured in bodies. They learned to read wire colors, dust patterns, pressure points, bad architecture. The silence of rooms designed to kill the second wrong hand touched the wrong thing. Men like that did not lose a limb and then calmly participate in adaptive mobility goals. They lost rank inside themselves. They lost the private structure that told them who they were every morning. At 7:11, an orderly came to say the intake team was on the floor. Claire picked up the chart and walked to the gym. The double doors swung open with a hydraulic sigh, and there he was. Logan Hale sat in a hospital wheelchair as if it had been issued by an enemy force. Dark hair, a little too long. Beard just past regulation. Broad shoulders under a charcoal hoodie. One hand flat on the armrest, holding still with effort. The blanket over his legs did nothing to hide the hard absence below the left knee. He looked younger than 31 until you saw the eyes. The eyes were the thing, not panicked, not medicated into softness, not begging, empty in the deliberate way of a man who had boarded something up from the inside and dared the world to test the nails. 2 orderlies hovered nearby, wearing that careful expression hospital staff wore around patients they had been warned about. Bennett stood beside the chair and began the handoff in clipped medical language. "Chief Hale, this is Claire Donovan, Senior Rehabilitation Specialist. She'll be overseeing your treatment plan while you're here." Logan did not look at her. Claire stepped forward anyway. "Good morning, Chief Hale." No response. She did not rush to fill the silence. Men like him used silence as a blade. The mistake civilians made was getting nervous and bleeding all over it. "I'm Claire," she said. "My job is to establish where you are physically and keep the damage from spreading into places we can prevent." Still nothing. Bennett glanced at her uneasy. She gave him a tiny nod that meant go. He dismissed the orderlies and left them alone in the gym. Claire pulled over a low stool and sat so that she was eye level with him, not looming, not crowding. She kept the chart closed on her knee. "We can keep this simple," she said. "Basic assessment. Range of motion. Surgical review if you consent. No prosthetic work today." His jaw shifted. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and worn, almost raw. "I'm not doing rehab." The words came out flat. No drama. That made them hit harder. Claire kept her tone level. "You're here because the medical team wants to prevent complications." He looked at her then fully. It was not the look of a patient meeting a clinician. It was the hard, measuring stare of a man who used to decide in seconds whether another human being knew what they were doing. "Do I look confused about where I am?" he asked. "Number. Do I look like I asked for your help?" "Number. Then let's save each other some time." He turned the chair a few inches with one hand, dismissing her before she had agreed to be dismissed. Claire stayed where she was. "Chief Hale." Something in her voice made him pause. "If you refuse everything she said, you still wake up in that body tomorrow. You still deal with pain, scar tissue, muscle loss, infection, risk, balance loss, and compensation injuries. Anger won't keep the hip from tightening. It won't stop the back from taking damage. It won't heal the residual limb clean." That got his full attention. Not because she was wrong. Because she had reached too close to the actual wound. His eyes went cold. "Residual limb," he repeated. "There it is." Claire held his gaze. "Would you prefer another term?" A humorless flicker moved at the corner of his mouth. "That polished little correction is exactly why I'm not wasting my time with this. You people think if you use the right words," he said, "everything gets tidy enough to manage. Functional outcome. Recovery trajectory. Residual limb. Nice language, clean language. Makes the room easier for everybody who doesn't have to live in it." Claire folded her hands. "Then tell me what it is." He let the question hang between them. When he answered, he did it like a verdict. "It's over." The gym kept moving around them. A therapist at the far table adjusted a shoulder brace. Someone laughed near the parallel bars. A printer spit out paper behind the nurse station. But the air around Logan Hale changed the moment he said it. Claire knew that tone. Not self-pity, not theater, finality. "What's over?" she asked. His stare sharpened, irritated by the question. "My job, my team, my usefulness. Pick one." The bluntness of it landed harder because he offered it without performance. Most people tried to hide the wound. He put his hand directly on it and dared her to do something with the blood. "You're 3 weeks out from losing a limb," Claire said. "You're allowed to hate that." "Allowed," he repeated as if the word were cheap. He looked past her toward the windows. I used to go into rooms before other men did, he said quietly. I used to be the thing between chaos and everybody else going home in one piece. That was the point of me. His hand moved to the blanket over his leg, hovering near the place where the shape changed. Now, some 19-year-old orderly has to lock my brakes before I transfer to a toilet. There it was. Not rage. Humiliation. The kind that turned help into an accusation. Claire's face did not move, but something inside her tightened. She knew too well the private violence of dependence. The way your own body could become foreign territory overnight. Chief Hale. She said, I'm not asking you to be cheerful. I'm asking you to let me do my job. He let out a short laugh with nothing warm in it. And what exactly is your job? To help you build function. He looked straight through her. That's not an answer. Claire let a beat pass. It's the one you're getting today. That surprised him. She saw it in the quick flicker of his eyes. Hospitals were full of people trained to soften. Claire did not soften. She adjusted pressure. He studied her now with more care than he had from the start. You military? He asked. The question came without warning, and for half a second the room narrowed. Claire's expression stayed still. Why would you ask that? You stand like somebody taught you not to waste space. That was a dangerous observation. Not because he was wrong, because he was too quick. Claire kept her voice neutral. I'm a therapist in Norfolk. That's all that matters in this room. His gaze stayed on her a second longer as if he knew there was more and was choosing not to force the issue. Then the wall slid back down. I'm not doing your assessment. All right. You putting that in my file? Yes. You enjoy that. Number. He gave one small nod, almost respectful for how little it offered. Good. Then we understand each other. He wheeled himself away before she could answer. Claire watched him go. Riley appeared at her shoulder a minute later, carrying an armful of therapy bands she had absolutely chosen as an excuse to be nearby. How bad? Claire kept her eyes on the hallway where Logan disappeared. Bad. Mean bad or hopeless bad. Claire bent to pick up the chart she had set on a bench. There's no such thing as hopeless. Riley exhaled. That bad then? The rest of the morning moved around Logan Hale like a bruise under skin. Claire saw him twice in passing. Once outside radiology, parked by the wall with a transport aide and staring at nothing. Again, near the nurse station where he refused pain medication with such cold precision the nurse walked away insulted by his manners. He never shouted, never made a scene. That told Claire something. His anger had discipline, which meant it had rank, which meant it had probably kept him alive before it turned inward. At 10:48, she opened his chart again and read deeper. Service record, deployment notes, awards. Incident summaries stripped clean by official language. On paper, heroism always looked cleaner than it did in real life. She stopped at one redacted after action line and read it twice. Operator advanced on secondary threat near occupied civilian structure under time-sensitive conditions. Injury sustained during neutralization. Further operational details classified. Claire stared at the sentence until the words blurred. She knew the smell of reports like that, knew the blank spaces where the real story lived. Somebody had moved forward when everyone else froze. Somebody had chosen the version of events with the highest chance of saving the most people and paid for it in flesh. At noon, she ate yogurt and almonds at her desk because she nearly always did. Across the room, two younger therapists laughed over some dating app catastrophe. Somebody had brought donuts. Sugar and stale coffee floated through the break room. Claire opened the bottom drawer of her desk, the one she never opened when anyone else was around. Inside lay a pair of dog tags looped in black cord. A St. Michael medal gone smooth from years of handling. A folded set of orders she no longer needed. And a photograph she almost never let herself look at for long. 8 people in desert camouflage under a white, hard sun. A younger Claire stood near the center jaw, set eyes hollowed by heat and lack of sleep, one hand pressed to the strap of a medical bag. Nobody in the photo was smiling properly. They were squinting into survival. The memory arrived the way those memories always did. Not as thought, as weather, heat, fuel, dust. The sharp tang before a convoy rolls. The intimate certainty that if something goes wrong, it will go wrong in one bright, terrible second. Then another image behind it. Hospital white. Burn dressings. A man's voice saying her name from very far away, trying to hook her back into the world. The break room door swung open. Claire shut the drawer with one smooth motion. Riley leaned in. "You hiding snacks in there?" "Only my personality," Riley snorted. "That better not be all." Chief Hale refused lunch. Claire's attention sharpened. "Anything else?" He told Dietary to stop looking at him like roadkill. Claire stood. "I'll go." She found him in his room, on the third-floor tray untouched, on the rolling table blinds half open to a sky gone flat and colorless over the river. The room had that temporary hospital emptiness that made belonging feel like a rule violation. One duffel bag in the corner. Navy hoodie draped over a visitor chair. No flowers, no cards, no family photographs. Logan sat angled toward the window. The blanket was gone now. The line of the amputation was visible beneath hospital shorts dressing clean the wound, still carrying the quiet violence of something new and unwanted. Claire knocked once and stepped inside. "You skipping meals now?" He did not turn. Didn't realize it was mandatory. It becomes my problem when you run yourself into the floor and blame therapy. Bold of you to assume there's going to be therapy. She crossed to the tray and lifted the soup lid. Cold. She set it down. You need calories. Need is a generous word. The river beyond the window looked like sheet metal. Claire picked up the sealed nutrition shake and held it toward him. "You can be angry and still eat." That got a glance. Brief, sharp. "Is that in the handbook?" "No," she said. "That one's free." His gaze moved to her hands, to the silver watch at her wrist, to the old pale scar just visible where her scrub sleeve rode up for a second. Men trained for threat notice details the way other people noticed weather. "You always this calm?" he asked. "Not always. Could have fooled me." Claire met his eyes. Control and calm are not the same thing. That held between them a moment too long. Then he looked away first. Still not hungry. Claire nodded once. Forcing dignity often looked like care, and landed like violence. She had learned that lesson the hard way. "Fine," she said, "but you drink the shake." A corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. Something rougher. "Yes, ma'am." The title came out edged with mockery, but not all of it was mockery. It hit her somewhere old. Her face gave him nothing. "Drink the shake, Chief." She left before the room could turn into something more complicated than a therapist and a patient were allowed to be. By the end of the shift, there was still no breakthrough. Only fragments. His refusals. Her notes. The dangerous awareness that he had clocked her faster than most people did. When she sat down to write the official summary, the language came the way it always did in hospitals, clean and insufficient. Patient resistant to treatment initiation. Declined mobility assessment. Declined surgical review. Displays anger related to injury and perceived loss of role. Likely significant distress linked to military identity disruption. Requires structured continuity and firm boundaries. Claire stopped at that last phrase. Identity disruption. Clinical language. Dry enough to survive committee review and insurance audits. Words that had never once captured what it felt like to wake up in a body that no longer matched the life built inside it. She shut down the monitor, gathered her things, and stepped into the dark cold outside just after 7. Norfolk had gone fully black and wet by then. Brake lights burned red on the slick streets. Somewhere down Granby Street, a bar door opened and spilled music and laughter onto the sidewalk for 3 brief seconds before closing again. Claire sat in her car without starting it. Logan Hale's chart lay on the passenger seat. She should have left it at the office, she knew that. But there it was anyway, thick with official truth and the half-lies institutions tell because the full reality is too jagged to file. Her phone buzzed. Bennett. Any progress? Claire stared at the screen, then typed back. Not yet. 3 dots appeared. Vanished, appeared again. Keep boundaries tight. She looked at that a long time before setting the phone face down. Her apartment in Ghent was small, clean, and quiet enough to hear the pipes knock in the wall when the heat came on. She changed into gray sweats, made tea she never touched, and opened her laptop at the kitchen table. Blue light filled the room. She did not read rehab manuals. She knew those by heart. She read combat amputation studies, transition outcomes, trauma papers on moral injury, peer support research in special operations communities. Anonymous veteran forum threads buried deep in the night internet where men who would never cry in front of a clinician admitted to strangers that they no longer knew who they were if they could not protect anyone. Every line pulled Logan Hale into sharper focus. Not difficult, not impossible, not merely angry. A man whose whole nervous system had been built around capability threat response and keeping other people alive. Remove the mission. Remove the limb. Remove the team. Then act surprised when he sets the room on fire without ever raising his voice. At 12:34, she closed the laptop and stood at the kitchen window. Norfolk slept in patches. A cab crossed the intersection below. Far off from the naval station side of the water, a horn sounded low through the dark. Her reflection in the glass looked like a woman held together by habit more than peace. Without thinking, she touched the scar that ran beneath her left collarbone through the fabric of her sweatshirt. Then kept her hand there. There were parts of her life she had buried because burial had once seemed like the only way to stay functional. Chesapeake Mercy had been built on that burial. Competence, reputation, a way to serve without reopening the sealed places every morning. But Logan Hale was the kind of man who made vault doors shift on their hinges. The next morning he refused therapy again, and the morning after that. By the third refusal, the unit had started adjusting around him. Staff brightened their voices too much when entering his room. New nurses checked his chart twice before speaking. Humans knew when pain had started eating through a person's edges. Claire kept showing up anyway. By then, she understood something the others did not. Chief Logan Hale was not fighting rehabilitation. He was fighting the fact that he had survived it at all. Once Claire saw that, clearly the shape of the problem changed. Most of the staff still thought Logan Hale was a hostile patient, with a bad attitude and a ruined threshold for cooperation. They were not wrong exactly. They were just standing too close to the fire to see what had started it. Hostility was the smoke. Shame was the burn underneath. A man like Logan did not wake up one morning and decide to become impossible. He had simply reached the point where every offered hand felt like evidence. On the 4th morning, transport brought him down to the gym before he had enough time to refuse on the floor. Snow came hard against the windows in white slants that looked almost horizontal in the wind. The therapy wing smelled of rubber mats, sanitizer, and stale coffee. Claire had moved one of the tall mirrors closer to the parallel bars before dawn, not as a trick and not exactly as an act of mercy either. If Logan was going to rebuild anything in that room, he would eventually have to see what the room saw and live through it. He rolled in at 8:53 wearing the same charcoal hoodie, same rigid shoulders, same stare that said he intended to outlast the day by hating it more than it could touch him. The transport orderly parked him near the bars and got out of the way with visible relief. Claire stood a few feet off with a clipboard tucked against her side. "Morning, Chief?" His eyes moved past her and landed on the mirror. Something changed in his face so fast, most people would have missed it. Not fear, not vanity. Something more intimate and more violent than either. For one clean second, he saw himself the way strangers now did. Chair, missing leg, hospital, dependency. The image hit him like a fist. He looked away, hard enough to make the motion itself feel dangerous. 1 minute, Claire said. His head turned back toward her. No. 30 seconds. Number. You do not have to stand today. You do not have to perform. You do have to remain in the same room as reality. His mouth flattened. That your clinical recommendation. It is my recommendation for breathing in your own life without treating it like contamination. His fingers closed over the armrests. Do not stand there bargaining with me like I'm some half-wild thing you can train with snacks. Claire kept her voice low. I'm not bargaining. I'm offering structure. He laughed, once dead of humor. Lady. I spent years walking into rooms rigged to kill people I had never met. I know what structure is. I know what risk is. I know what useful feels like. He looked at the bars, the harness, the mirror. This is theater. A therapist at the far table went still without meaning to. Riley, sorting foam blocks near the lockers, kept her eyes carefully on the shelf in front of her and listened to every word. Claire let the insult land and stay where it fell. What do you call it? She asked. When a man decides humiliation is more honorable than effort. The gym seemed to narrow around him. His eyes snapped back to hers, dark and exhausted, and carrying the first real edge of something beneath the anger. Not rage. Desperation wearing arrogance because it still thought arrogance looked stronger. I call it none of your business. Then he shoved at the wheels and turned himself out of the station so fast the mirror shivered in the draft he left behind. For a moment, nobody moved. Riley let out a breath. You know, most people start with trust-building exercises. Claire crossed to the mirror and pushed it back against the wall. Most people are not treating Logan Hale. Riley watched her. Are you sure you're helping? Claire straightened, not yet. She did not add what sat behind that answer. Sometimes, the first useful thing you gave a person was not comfort. It was contact. Honest, unwelcome, difficult contact with the thing they had been outrunning. Not enough to break them. Enough to keep the lie from settling in as permanent furniture. By 10:30, she had requested the unredacted transfer supplements through internal channels and used more of her institutional credibility than she liked spending before noon. The files arrived just before lunch. She shut her office door and read them alone. The language was cleaner than the reality behind it, but not as clean as the public chart. Patient displays likely guilt fixation related to mission event. Patient rejects characterization of injury as sacrifice. Statements include, I should have been faster and someone better would have cleared it clean. Patient appears to interpret survival as operational failure. Claire sat back very slowly. There it was, in language plain enough to matter. Not just grief, not just pride, not just a combat patient resisting dependence. He had built a moral argument against his own continued existence in the form he now occupied. The missing leg was not the wound in his mind. The wound was the belief that he had fallen short in the one moment that defined him. Outside her office, the hospital kept making its ordinary noise. Phone calls, cartwheels, somebody laughing at the wrong volume in the break room, someone else crying quietly in a family consult room behind thin walls. Human beings dragging themselves through institutions because pain always needed signatures before it got a hallway. Inside, Claire read the notes again. She knew that voice. Not his exact words, but the shape of them. If I had moved faster, if I had chosen better, if I had seen the pattern 1 second sooner. Trauma loved counterfeit control. It convinced the mind that if an event could be rewritten as error, then the world remained understandable. Harsh, but understandable. Better to be guilty than helpless. Guilt preserved the illusion that the outcome had once belonged to you. At 12:17, there was a knock on her door. Riley leaned in with half a sandwich in one hand. You look like you're either solving a murder or planning one. Claire closed the file, neither. That did not sound convincing. Riley came farther in, took one look at Claire's face, and lowered the sandwich. It's bad. Claire nodded once. Riley sat down without asking. You want to tell me? Number. You want me to stop asking? For now, Riley accepted that more easily than most people would have. He refused lunch again. Claire rose. I know. You can't fix everyone with that face you make. Claire took her coat from the chair back. What face? The one that says somebody is getting dragged back into the land of the living, whether they like it or not. Claire did not answer. Riley muttered behind her. That was not a compliment, by the way. Claire found Logan in the day room this time, parked near the television no one was really watching. A football game played with the volume down, while 3 patients ignored it in companionable silence. Logan sat apart from them, tray untouched on the side table, jaw set, gaze fixed on the blank strip of parking lot visible through the glass doors. She stopped beside him. You making a point or just collecting calorie deficits? He did not look up. Both. You need food. He nodded toward the tray. Looks like somebody already had that thought. Claire pulled the nutrition shake from the tray slot and held it out. Drink this. He gave the bottle a brief glance. Persistent. Alive people usually are. That got his eyes on her. There was more awareness in them now than there had been 3 days ago. Not more softness, just more attention. She had entered the category of person requiring active management in his head, and for men like him that was almost intimacy. You always come to work armed, he asked. With what? He looked at the bottle in her hand, then at the file tucked under her arm, then at her face. Depends on the room. Claire set the shake on the tray table within reach. Drink it before it warms up. His gaze dropped to her left hand resting near the chair arm. There was a pale line running along the base of her thumb, thin and old and easy to miss. His eyes lingered a fraction too long. Burn scar, he asked. Claire did not move. You ask a lot of questions for someone committed to silence. Occupational reflex. That occupation is over, remember. The answer came out sharper than she intended. She saw it hit him. Not because he flinched, because he went still. For half a second the air between them tightened. Then he reached for the shake without another word, twisted the cap, and drank half of it in one long swallow, as if surrendering to nutrition should at least be done aggressively. Claire gave one small nod and turned to go. Donovan. She looked back. He still was not looking at her. You ever get tired of sounding like an instruction manual? Only when people confuse resistance with personality. A corner of his mouth threatened movement and thought better of it. She left him there with the bottle in hand and the television flickering across his face in blue-white silence. The next day, he refused pain medication before physical transport and nearly blacked out during a transfer from the chair to the exam table. He covered the moment well. Most people would not have seen it. Claire saw the gray wash under his skin, the way his breath shortened the almost imperceptible lag in his focus when the room tilted and he forced it level again by will alone. Back in the gym, she set the clipboard down and stood in front of him. Scale of 1 to 10. Number. Pain is not less real because you dislike the question. I dislike the implication that I'm required to narrate it. 8, she asked. His jaw tightened. 9, she said. He looked at her then with open irritation. That's supposed to impress you. No, it's supposed to keep you from ripping your own recovery apart, because being stoic feels more honorable. He barked one short laugh. You really hate theater. I hate waste. He stared at her for another beat, then looked away first. By Friday, the staff had started rearranging themselves around him in small, unconscious ways. Newer nurses volunteered less often for his wing. A student therapist lingered outside his door 1 full minute before knocking, psyching herself into professionalism. Orderlies traded assignments in the hall with the furtive energy of men swapping the worst task on deck. None of them were afraid he would become violent. They were afraid of being made unnecessary by somebody who needed them. Claire understood the difference. It was one reason she did not take his contempt personally. Men like Logan did not despise help because help was weak. They despised help because it arrived only after the self they trusted had failed to prevent the need for it. Late that afternoon, she found him alone in the gym. Transport had brought him down, but a scheduling mix-up had left him with 10 unsupervised minutes before the next session block. He sat near the windows with the harbor gone white behind him, chair angled toward the empty bars. Claire walked over and leaned against the wall. You planning to do anything with your appointment, or just glare at the equipment until it confesses? He did not turn. You always this charming after 4 p.m., only with difficult men. Lucky me. The room was quiet enough to hear the heater click in the vents. Without looking at her, he said, "You know what I hate most." Claire waited. He touched the wheel rim lightly with one thumb. Not the pain. Not the chair. Not even waking up and forgetting for half a second and then remembering all over again. His voice flattened. It's the way everybody talks slower now. Claire did not speak. Doctors, nurses, civilians. They hear one piece of your body is gone and suddenly the whole room starts acting like your mind went with it. He laughed under his breath, bitter and tired. I used to brief men before they crossed thresholds. I used to be trusted with seconds that mattered. His eyes stayed on the bars. Now strangers explain safety rails to me. There it was again. Not the missing limb. The insult to identity. Claire crossed the space between them and crouched so he had to meet her eyes if he wanted to say anything further. No one here thinks you're stupid. That's not the same as seeing me. She let that sit. Then she asked, very quietly, "Do you know what makes this harder than the leg?" He almost smiled without humor. "I'm sure you'll tell me. You still speak about yourself in past tense." Something in his face shifted. Not enough to name, enough to matter. He turned away first. "Get out of my head." Claire rose. "Get out of your own." He said nothing after that. But he did not wheel away either. Over the weekend, Claire went in for chart review she could have done Monday. The building was quieter, stripped down to essentials weekend staffing, lending the halls a more honest kind of fatigue. She sat alone in her office and pulled his records again, then not his records. Research, surgical adaptation data, phantom pain management, identity reconstruction after catastrophic injury in combat populations, peer-based recovery models, case notes from military transition centers where former operators had improved only after somebody stopped talking to them like inspiration projects and started speaking in the older language of task duty and competence. The more she read, the more one fact sharpened. Standard procedure would not reach him. That did not mean standard procedure was wrong. It meant it belonged to a different species of wound. By Monday morning, she had changed small things. No brochures on his tray, no laminated recovery milestones, no phrasing that tried to soften reality into digestible pieces. She kept the sessions spare, direct, functional. She cut every sentence that smelled like inspiration. At 8:53, transport rolled him in again. He looked more tired than before. Not physically unstable. Healing was still on track, but the surface of him had pulled tighter overnight. Something under the skin was pressing harder against containment. Claire nodded toward the mat table. Transfer assessment, 1 attempt. He looked at her as though deciding whether contempt was worth the energy. Number, 1 attempt. Still no. This is America. You're free to make bad decisions. A muscle jumped in his cheek. Across the room, Riley turned away so fast it was obvious she was trying not to laugh. Logan caught it too and glared at both of them. "Do you rehearse this?" "No," Claire said. "I'm naturally efficient." For one fleeting instant, something dangerously close to reluctant amusement moved in his eyes. Then it was gone. He planted both hands on the wheelchair arms and pushed up halfway before sitting down again with a sharp, controlled breath through his nose. Claire had seen enough bodies in pain to recognize the tell at once. "You're guarding the left hip. I'm thrilled you noticed. Lift the blanket." He did not move. "Chief." Planning to ask nicely. "Number." His mouth flattened again. Then he yanked the blanket aside. The residual limb dressing looked clean. Swelling had come down. Surgical healing remained solid, but the muscles around the hip and low back sat tight with defensive compensation. He was holding his whole frame braced against change. Claire crouched in front of him, careful and unsentimental. "You keep locking everything down like this. Your back is going to start paying for a war it didn't volunteer for." He looked toward the windows. "You ever stop talking like a field manual?" "I do. You haven't earned it." That should have provoked him. Instead, he kept staring at the gray light beyond the glass. Finally, he said, "Didn't sleep." Something in Claire loosened despite herself. Pain. He gave a dead flat laugh. "Sure." She pulled the stool over and sat. "Tell me where it starts." He looked at her. Really looked this time, as if testing whether she knew the question was impossible. "You say that like there's one place. Pick the loudest." For a moment, she thought he might answer. Instead, the wall slammed back into position. "Number." He shoved at the wheel rims and turned the chair away from the bars. Claire stepped into his path before he could build momentum. "Move." "Number." "Call security if that helps your paperwork." "Move." "Chief." He leaned back, eyes darkening. "I'm not one of your projects, and I'm not one of your enemies." His voice dropped on the second sentence. "You sure about that?" That one landed. Not because he fully meant it. Because some part of him did. Pain, that deep, always wanted a target. If it could not kill the self, it looked for a witness. Behind them, the gym kept pretending to function normally. Resistance pulleys clicked. A radio murmured at the nurse station. Someone swore under his breath over fine motor exercises at the far table. Claire lowered her voice. "I know this feels like humiliation. You don't know a damn thing about what this feels like." A few heads turned. Riley stopped moving entirely. Claire did not step back. "Then tell me." His eyes flashed. "You want the truth." He hit the armrest once with his palm. "Those guys in this building see the chair before they see me. Every one of them, every resident, every therapist, every stranger doing that fake, careful voice like if they use the wrong word, I'll crack open in the hallway." His breathing had picked up now, fury burning through restraint. "I was the first man into bad rooms," he said. "Not because I was brave. Because I was good. Because when things went sideways, I was the thing that made them survivable for everybody else." He slapped the armrest again, harder. "Now I need help crossing a floor." The gym had gone almost silent. Claire felt the old ache wake behind her sternum, the one reserved for hearing somebody speak a language she had once buried in herself. She said carefully, "There are different forms of service." His head snapped toward her. "There it is. That's not what I said. It's what you meant." His voice cracked across the room like a shot. "You want me to picture some clean little second act where I become inspiring. Strap on a prosthetic smile. Talk to kids about resilience. Is that it?" He hit the chair frame hard enough to make it ring. "I used to clear explosives for men who kicked doors for a living. I used to be useful where mistakes got zipped into bags. And now I'm supposed to care about weight shifting and exercise bands." Claire stood very still, because under all the noise, under all the contempt, he had finally said the truest thing yet. He did not know who he was if he could no longer be needed the way he once had been. And once that truth was loose in the room, nothing about him looked simple anymore. By noon, the hospital had gone back to pretending it knew how to contain pain. Phones rang. Carts rolled. A volunteer in a pale blue smock wheeled magazines down the hall as if crossword puzzles and celebrity profiles might soften the architecture of loss. In the break room, someone had brought in grocery store cookies on a paper plate. At the nurse station, Riley was trying and failing not to stare at Claire every time she passed. Logan had been taken upstairs after the blow-up in the gym, not sedated, not restrained, just exhausted enough that even his anger seemed to have spent itself. Claire had expected him to shut down again in the silence after that kind of exposure. Men like him often did. They would speak too much, once feel the nakedness of it, then seal themselves back up twice as hard. Instead, the whole floor felt as if it were waiting for weather. At 12:17, Claire sat in her office, reading through his chart for what had to be the 10th time that week, though by then she was no longer looking for facts. She was reading for rhythm, for what had not been said, for the holes in the report where the real blast lived. A knock struck the frame once, then again. The charge nurse stepped in. "There are 3 men downstairs asking for Chief Hale." Claire looked up. "Family." The nurse shook her head. "Military IDs. One of them looks like he could buy this building just to set it on fire." That brought Claire to her feet. Did security clear them? They showed identification, and the guard at the front desk suddenly remembered posture. So, yes. Claire closed Logan's file, slipped on her white coat, and walked toward the stairwell instead of waiting for the elevator. Chesapeake Mercy's lobby had been designed by people trying to make illness look less institutional than it was. Warm wood paneling, potted plants struggling under fluorescent light. Framed photographs of sailboats and sunsets along the Chesapeake that nobody ever looked at for more than 3 seconds. At this hour, it was usually full of movement. Families checking in. Delivery staff passing through. Patients being wheeled toward tests they did not want. But the room had changed by the time Claire reached the last step. 3 men stood near reception, and every person within sight of them had already noticed. Not because they were loud. Men like these never needed volume. The oldest stood in the middle. Early 40s, maybe. Broad in the chest. Gray beginning at his temples. Civilian coat. Dark trousers. Boots planted with the kind of stillness that had once come from being the person other people watched before they decided whether to panic. To his left stood a dark-haired man in a black wool coat cut too well to be accidental. He held his gloves in one hand. His face was still in the expensive, self-controlled way of a man who had long ago learned that if you said less, people imagined more. His eyes moved once across the room and seemed to weigh exits, cameras, weakness, and lies, all in the same glance. The youngest was Latino, sharp, featured, athletic, carrying enough restless energy that the stillness had to be disciplined rather than natural. He looked like someone who had once smiled easily and no longer did it for free. All 3 turned the moment Claire stepped into the lobby. The older one saw her, and something in his posture shifted on instinct. Spine straighter, chin lifted half an inch. Respect settling into place before thought had time to argue with it. "Ma'am," he said. The receptionist blinked. Riley, who had somehow appeared beside the coffee kiosk despite having no reason to be on the ground floor, froze with a paper cup halfway to her mouth. Claire stopped a few feet from them. "You're here for Chief Hale." The older man nodded. "Master Chief Owen Pike." He gestured with one hand. Vincent Marino, Javier Torres. Claire gave them all a single glance and stored a dozen things without seeming to. Rank patterns. Unit rhythm. The hierarchy between them. Pike was command. Marino was not second exactly, but he was the kind of man whose silence carried leverage. Torres was younger, quicker, dangerous in a more visible way. "I'm Claire Donovan," she said. "Chief Hale is under my care." Marino's gaze settled on her face for one steady second longer than courtesy required. Not flirtation. Assessment. Recognition trying to place itself. "We know," he said. His voice came low, and even East Coast edges worn smooth by old discipline and money somewhere in the family line. Claire did not ask how they knew. Men like these always knew more than they volunteered. He has been refusing visitors. Torres let out a quiet breath through his nose. "Yeah, that tracks." Pike kept his eyes on Claire. "With respect, ma'am, he does not get to make that call today." There it was again. "Ma'am." Precise. Unmistakably military. Not an affectation. Not a performance. The kind of acknowledgement people used only when they had been trained to mean it. Claire folded her arms. "He is unstable." Marino answered this time. "No," he said. "He is ashamed." The sentence cut cleaner than anything in the medical file. Not resistant. Not difficult. Ashamed. Claire felt the truth of it settle under her ribs because it named the wound without dressing it up. Pike reached into his coat and withdrew a folded sheet with command authorization and unit contact information. Claire skimmed it once. The clearance was real. So was the urgency. Somebody from his chain had realized Logan was sinking and had sent the kind of men he could not dismiss without bleeding for it. "You get 20 minutes, Claire said. Torres glanced at Pike, then back at her. "We came from Little Creek for 20 minutes. Claire turned her gaze on him cool enough to make the point without raising her voice. "Would you prefer none?" A quick grin flickered across his mouth. 20 is excellent, ma'am. Marino's mouth almost moved, almost. Claire gestured toward the elevators. Come with me. The lobby watched them cross. She could feel it in the room. Curiosity, suspicion. The sharpened silence that appears when ordinary people sense a history larger than the setting allows for. In the elevator, no one spoke at first. Claire stood nearest the doors. Pike behind her to the left. Marino to the right. Torres in the rear corner, eyes moving over the mirrored walls and floor panel as if an ordinary hospital lift still deserved tactical attention. The fluorescent light flattened all of them into a strange, quiet composition. White coat. Dark coats. Rain still on their shoulders. Torres broke the silence. How bad is he? Claire kept her eyes on the changing floor numbers, physically or otherwise. Otherwise. She considered the polished version and discarded it. He is angry enough to refuse the help that would make his life easier. Humiliated enough to turn every offer into a fight. Smart enough to know exactly what he is doing while he does it. Marino watched her reflection in the mirror. Any self-harm indicators? No direct ones. Indirect. Claire turned slightly. Do you always interrogate medical staff on the way to the patient? Torres answered before either of the older men could. Only when it is our guy. The words should have sounded territorial. Instead, they sounded devoted. Pike stepped in before the tension tightened. We appreciate what you are dealing with, ma'am. Claire looked back at the elevator doors. You can thank me after he agrees to stay in the body he has left. That silenced all three of them. The doors opened on three. They walked down the corridor past the nurse's station, past two older veterans playing cards in the day room, past a volunteer arranging tulips nobody had asked for. One of the card players lifted his head as the three men passed and whistled once under his breath. No one responded. At Logan's door, Claire paused. He may throw you out. Marino's mouth shifted into something that was not a smile and not far from dangerous. He can try. Claire knocked once and stepped inside. Logan sat near the window angled toward the gray river. The lunch tray had been cleared. The nutrition shake from earlier was gone. Small progress wore strange disguises, Chief Hale Claire said. He turned with refusal already in his face, and then saw the men behind her. Everything on his expression changed. It happened fast, but not fast enough to hide. The deadness broke first. Then disbelief. Then a flash of relief so sharp it looked painful. After that came embarrassment at being seen, vulnerable anger at the relief, and finally the hard attempt to cover all of it with indifference. What the hell are you doing here? Pike stepped in first as if he had entered rooms under worse light and worse circumstances his whole adult life. Fixing a mistake. Torres followed, carrying a flat envelope in one hand. Marino closed the door behind them and stayed near it, posted without ever seeming to post. Logan's jaw tightened. I told command not to send anybody. Pike pulled the visitor chair over and sat in it backward, forearms resting across the backrest in the easy way only dangerous men could afford. Yeah, he said. We ignored that. Torres tossed the envelope onto the bed. It slid to Logan's good hand. Open it. Logan did not move, not interested. Open it, Chief. There was enough old rank in Torres's voice to make the title sting. Logan tore the flap one-handed and tipped a stack of photographs into his lap. Sun-burned team shots. Dust. Helicopter shadows. A truck with too many men grinning in front of it. A rooftop somewhere hot and flat and foreign. One Christmas picture with Santa hats stretched over close-cut hair and exhausted faces. Logan stared at them. For a second, he looked younger. Human in a way pain had not permitted since he arrived. Torres leaned against the wall by the window. You vanished, brother. No calls, no texts, no answer for command. We gave you a week to be noble and difficult, then Pike got tired of listening to me complain. I did not complain, Pike said. You absolutely did. Marino remained by the door, eyes on Logan, with the kind of silence that carried years inside it. Logan set the photos down too carefully. "You should not have come. Not your decision," Marino said. His voice was quiet, but it landed heavier than either of the others. Logan's eyes flicked to him, and something deeper than friendship lived in that glance. Loyalty forged the hard way. Shared danger. Years of trusting one another where trust had to hold under pressure and blood. Claire stayed near the foot of the bed, invisible on purpose. This was not her moment to direct, only to witness and catch what mattered. Pike leaned forward slightly. "You know what the blast report says." Logan's face shut down. "Don't. It says the secondary would have taken the whole front if you had not moved." I said don't. Torres pushed off the wall, "Then listen anyway." Logan's hand tightened on the photographs. Marino spoke before either of the other men could. "You saved us." Just that, no speech, no decoration. Logan looked away. His throat worked once. Pike's voice dropped. "You saved 6 operators and 2 civilians, Logan. I took fragments in the shoulder because you moved first. I got hit because I was too slow." The words came out immediate and flat, as if they had been waiting behind his teeth for weeks, with nowhere to go. Nobody in the room moved. Then Torres did the gentlest thing Claire had seen from him since he entered the hospital. He stepped closer to the bed and lowered his voice. "No," he said. "You were the only one who saw it in time." Logan laughed once, bitter, fractured. "That's supposed to help. It is supposed to be true." A long silence settled over the room. Pike reached into his coat pocket and drew out his phone. Colonel Renshaw sent a message. Logan's expression hardened instantly. "I do not care. Then I will read it anyway." Pike glanced at the screen. "Tell Hale he can curse me out in person when he is strong enough to make the trip. Tell him the recommendation packet is already moving. Tell him the men he pulled out still owe him a drink, and I am tired of listening to them argue over who pays first." Logan's eyes narrowed. "Recommendation packet." Torres answered, "Silver Star." Logan looked away so fast it almost seemed reflexive. "No." Pike's tone did not change. "Not your call. I do not want it. Still not your call." Rain ticked softly against the window. Logan swallowed once. "A medal does not give me my leg back." Pike held his gaze. "No. It tells the truth in official language." Something in Claire tightened at that line. Official language. Truth flattened into wording fit for command review and permanent record. She knew exactly how much blood got left out that way. Torres sat on the radiator cover under the window. "We did not come here to sell you inspiration, man. We came because you stopped answering, and that does not work for us." Logan stared down at the blanket over his legs. Marino moved away from the door at last and came to stand beside the bed. He reached down and touched one photograph with a gloved fingertip. It showed the team kneeling in desert dust, Logan in the middle, younger, grinning, one arm thrown around Torres's neck. "You see this man?" Marino asked. Logan said nothing. "That man is still in this room." Logan's mouth tightened. "No, he is not." Marino's stare did not break. "Then why are we here?" The question sat there with no room to dodge it. Not sentimental, not abstract. If the answer were truly no, they would not have crossed state lines and command layers and their own private discomfort with grief to stand in a rehab room and drag him into the light. Pike let the silence work before speaking again. "Who else knows?" Logan asked at last, voice low. "About the leg," Torres said, "everybody." "About me acting like this," Pike answered. "Us, command, probably the nurses who have had the pleasure of your bedside manners." Something in Logan's face moved. Not a smile, a fracture line. Claire saw it and said nothing. Pike leaned back. "How is the care?" Logan gave a humorless breath. "You asking if the food is terrible, or if the rehab lady is trying to make me run a marathon?" Torres glanced at Claire. Rehab lady. Claire did not blink. Pike looked back at Logan. "She any good?" The answer came too fast to have been planned. "She is annoying." Torres grinned for the first time since entering the room. That was not the question. Logan shot him a look with enough edge to strip paint. Then muttering, "She does not talk to me like I am made of glass." Marino's eyes shifted to Claire and rested there a second. Something like approval passed through them, small and unreadable. Pike rose from the chair. Good. He placed a business card on the bedside table. My direct line. You answer next time. Logan did not touch it. Torres stood too. We are coming back next week. You do not have to. Torres ignored him. Also, Marino's wife sent cannoli, but he ate 2 in the parking lot, so Mercy has already suffered. Marino did not deny it. Logan looked from one to the other, and the war in him sat plain as weather now. Pride against relief. Shame against belonging. The old instinct to cut himself off before anyone could see too much. Beneath all that, another thing. Need. Not weak, not childish, human. When the 3 men turned toward the door, Logan said, Pike. The older man looked back. Logan's voice had gone rough. Did the team really send those photos? Pike met his eyes. Every one of them. Logan gave one short nod and looked down before the impact of that could show too clearly on his face. Claire stepped into the hall with the 3 men and pulled the door softly shut behind her. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Torres exhaled. He looks like hell. Language Pike said automatically. Torres stared at him. You have literally shot people. That does not affect manners. Claire almost smiled, almost. Marino slipped a folded sheet of paper from his coat pocket and handed it to her. Names and numbers, he said. Ours. Command liaison. Chaplain, he will actually talk to if cornered correctly. Claire took it. The paper was warm from his coat. He may resent this visit later. Marino's face remained still. He can resent it while healing. Pike adjusted his collar. Thank you for letting us in, ma'am. There it was again. Clean. Formal. Carrying a whole world of rank and memory inside a single syllable. Claire tucked the paper into her pocket. He responded to truth, not encouragement. You understand the difference, Pike said. Yes. Torres glanced back toward Logan's door. He will fight harder now. That can help, Claire said. It can also get ugly, Marino replied. A faint chill moved through her, unrelated to the hallway temperature. I know. Marino's eyes settled on her once more, quiet and cutting. I think you do. The statement hung there. Not a question. Not accusation. Recognition reaching for shape and choosing not to name what it recognized. A nurse passed them with a medication cart, and the corridor returned to itself in a rush. Wheels, voices, the ordinary machinery of care. Pike extended his hand. This time, Claire took it. His grip was firm, brief military. Take care of our brother, he said. Claire released his hand. Get him to cooperate, and I might. Torres laughed under his breath. Pike did not. He only gave one final nod and turned toward the elevator, Marino and Torres falling in around him with the smooth instinct of men who had moved as a unit through too many kinds of danger to stop now. Claire stood in the hall until the elevator doors closed. Then she went back into Logan's room. He had not moved much. The photographs lay spread over the blanket. One hand rested across them. His eyes were fixed on a team shot taken at some nameless base, all bad haircuts, dust, and that exhausted brightness only found among people who had earned each other the hard way. He did not look up when she entered. They talk too much, he said. Claire leaned against the wall. Occupational hazard. That drew the faintest sound from him. Not a laugh. More like the memory of one. She let the quiet settle. After a while, he said Torres still runs his mouth when he is worried. Claire said nothing. Pike still carries everybody. Still, she said nothing. A few more seconds passed. Marino only comes when it matters. The room had changed somehow. Not healed, not safe, just softer. Like a fist unclenching one finger at a time. Claire crossed to the chair near the bed and sat. You should sleep. He shook his head slightly. Not yet. Rain traced the window. Somewhere downriver a horn sounded low through the afternoon. After a time he asked without looking at her. If they come back, do you let them in? Claire looked at his hand over the photographs, the tendons still tight from the work of holding himself together. Yes, she said. This time, when he closed his eyes, he did not look like a man disappearing. He looked like a man listening to a locked door somewhere inside himself come undone. The room stayed quiet after that. Not empty. Quiet the way church basements are quiet after confession when the air still holds what was said. Several minutes passed before he spoke again. "You going to write in my chart that I tolerated visitors without threatening bodily harm?" Claire looked down at him. "I might use warmer language." His mouth shifted. "Barely. Do not get carried away." She rose and slid the extra chair back against the wall. At the door, she heard him say low enough that most people would have missed it, "Donovan." She turned. He still had not touched Pike's card. His hand rested near it now. They should not have had to come all the way up here. Claire studied him a moment. "No," she said, "you should have answered the phone." That should have angered him. Instead, he gave one tired blink and looked away, which was as close to surrender as she had seen from him yet. The rest of the afternoon moved around the visit like pressure after thunder. Staff whispered. Riley cornered Claire by the ice machine and demanded context with all the moral fury of a woman who believed mystery in the workplace was personally offensive. Claire gave her none. Bennett asked if the visitors had been a problem. Claire answered no. That was enough to make him suspicious. By evening, the weather had turned from snow to freezing rain. Claire left the hospital under a dark sky and drove home through streets slick with reflected brake lights. Norfolk felt clenched. The bars glowed amber against the wet. Sailors hunched under awnings with cigarettes burning in their hands. The wind shoved at the intersections and made every streetlight look lonelier than it was. At home, she stood in her kitchen without turning on the television. Pike's use of ma'am had stayed with her all day, not because the word itself mattered, because of the part of her that had answered to it before she could stop it. She knew exactly where that reflex had been built. Not in Virginia. Not in rehab school. In heat and dust and diesel. In places where hierarchy kept panic from swallowing rooms whole. Men had called her ma'am there with blood on their sleeves and smoke in the air, and every time it had carried the same impossible combination of respect and need. She had trained herself not to miss that sound. Then 3 men walked into a hospital lobby and brought the buried language of her first life back from the dead. She opened the hall closet and took down the hard case from the top shelf. Inside lay the things she never displayed. A folded flag from formal discharge. A commendation sealed in plastic. Dog tags. A photograph she never looked at unless she was alone. This one was different from the unit picture in her desk. No smiles, just a row of men and women outside a field hospital in desert camouflage, all of them too thin, too tired, too alert. Claire stood third from the left, younger and sharper jaw set in the posture of somebody who still believed discipline could keep chaos inside its lane. Her phone lit up on the counter. Bennett. How did the visit go? Claire read the message twice and typed back. Productive. The reply came quickly. Good. Keep things clinical. She stared at the screen until it dimmed, then turned the phone face down. The next morning came hard and colorless. Dirty snow lined the curbs outside Chesapeake Mercy. In the gym, the windows sweated under the pressure of cold outside and hospital heat within. Claire arrived before sunrise, checked the bars, adjusted 2 harness straps, and stood in the center of the empty room, looking at the space where yesterday had broken open. At 8:53, transport wheeled Logan in. He looked worse, not in his healing. The surgical site still tracked well. Color good. Shoulders strong, but something in his face had tightened overnight. The visit had cracked a door, and now the room behind it was full of air he did not yet know how to breathe. The orderly parked him near the bars and escaped with professional speed. Claire approached with a clipboard. Morning. His eyes flicked up to her and away. Do not start. That depends. On what? Whether you want to make this difficult before or after coffee. A short breath escaped him through his nose. Not contempt, not amusement. Something in the unstable territory between. You always come armed. Only with people who confuse pain for authority. That got his full attention. He looked at her the way men did when they were deciding whether to fight or listen. This time, both options cost him something. Claire kept her tone even. Today, we are not doing anything dramatic. Transfer assessment. Weight shift, if tolerated. Basic upper body work, if you can manage 20 minutes without insulting the profession. He stared at her for a long second, then at the bars, then back to her. Can I refuse just because I dislike your tone? You can refuse because this is a free country. I can still document that you were being an ass. Riley, stretching resistance bands across the room, nearly dropped one. Logan looked at Claire, then at the bars again. For the first time since he had arrived at Chesapeake Mercy, he did not wheel away. The shift in the room was so small that anyone who did not work with pain for a living might have missed it. His hands stayed on the armrests. His shoulders were still braced. His eyes still carried that exhausted hostility that had become his default expression. But he remained where he was, and in a place like that with a man like him, staying put was not nothing. Staying put was consent in its earliest, ugliest form. Claire nodded toward the mat table. One transfer. His jaw flexed. You really love impossible timing. I prefer useful timing. You say that like those are the same thing. They are if the work gets done. He looked at the bars again. Beyond them, the windows held a hard white sky over the river. The world outside looked cold enough to shear things down to their frame. Inside, the gym smelled of disinfectant rubber sweat and those stale coffee grounds somebody had spilled near the sink an hour earlier. Riley had gone very still near the storage shelves. Across the room, one of the orderlies slowed down while pretending to search for a gate belt he had already found. Even the patients seemed to feel that something in the air had shifted. That was the strange thing about hospitals. Nothing stayed private for long. Pain had a way of altering the pressure in a room. Logan planted both hands on the chair and pushed up again. This time he got higher. Not enough for a clean transfer. Enough for the effort to expose itself. His right leg drove hard shoulders and upper back, overcompensating left hip guarded against every fraction of movement. He held himself there for one raw second, chest tightening, then dropped back down into the chair with a breath that sounded cut from metal. Claire did not crowd him. You are stronger than your mechanics. That's supposed to help. It is supposed to irritate you into proving me right. A muscle jumped near his temple. He reset his grip not because her line had inspired him, but because she had translated the moment into a challenge rather than pity. And challenge still belonged to the older map in his body. He pushed again. This time he got himself across. Not pretty. Not stable. The board scraped louder than it should have. His breath caught when the left side took load. His hands shook once at the end. But he made it onto the table under his own power and sat there breathing hard, face gone pale with effort and anger at the fact that effort now looked like this. Riley turned away fast enough to disguise the relief on her face. Claire marked the clipboard. Transfer achieved. Logan looked at her with open distrust. You really going to make that sound official? Yes. He wiped one hand over his mouth. That feels insulting. That means it counts. He stared at her another second, then looked away toward the window. There was sweat already at his hairline. Not much. Enough. Claire kept her voice level. Back to the chair. His head turned sharply. Now, yes, you do understand rest cycles, right? I understand you have enough in the tank to argue. That nearly did it. Not a smile. But something at the corner of his mouth twitched and disappeared so quickly it might have been pain. He made the return transfer uglier than the first. Real fatigue had entered the room now, and fatigue stripped performance from people whether they wanted that or not. He landed badly, corrected, breathed through the correction and sat with his hands on the wheels and his pulse visible at his throat. Claire checked the time. Good, we are done. He looked up immediately suspicious. That is it? For this block. I did 2 transfers. Yes. He waited. Then, almost against his will, that is all. Claire met his eyes. Today, yes. That got him. She saw it in the way his gaze sharpened. Men who expected punishment often did not know what to do with proportion. At the far wall, Riley picked up a stack of folded towels she absolutely did not need and crossed the gym with them just to pass close enough to Claire to whisper, "Did hell tilt off axis?" Claire did not look at her. "Go inventory something." "I am inventorying miracles." Riley. Leaving. Logan heard all of it. His expression said he regretted every choice that had placed him within range of witnesses. Claire wheeled him herself back toward the corridor not because transport was unavailable, but because some moments could not survive too many hands. The hall smelled faintly of floor cleaner and overcooked vegetables. Sun had broken weakly through the cloud cover and thrown pale bars of light across the tile. At his room, she locked the brakes and stepped aside. "You can manage the board." His eyes flicked to her face, measuring for condescension and finding none. Yes, she let him do it. The transfer from chair to bed was slower this time. More controlled, but at greater cost. Pain wrote his features now in brief, involuntary flashes when the left hip took strain. He got himself over without help and sat still once he landed one hand flat on the mattress, breathing through his nose until his pulse stopped showing at his throat. Claire said nothing. Silence correctly used could preserve dignity better than reassurance ever did. After several seconds, he looked up. "You always leave people alone after they fail." "You did not fail." His laugh came dry. "That is generous." "No," she said. "That is accurate." He looked down at his hands again. Then, quieter. "Do they all know now?" Claire knew what he meant. Not the staff, not the details. He meant the larger thing. The fact that he had cracked. That his team had seen him in this room, in this chair, in this version of his life. "Enough," she said. He exhaled. "I hate that." "Yes." Another silence opened. Then he said something so low it almost missed being heard. "I am glad it was them." Claire looked towards the window before answering. "I know." She left him with the photograph still spread over the blanket, and Pike's card turned face up on the side table. By late afternoon, the floor had resumed its normal rhythm, but only on the surface. Underneath, the hospital had noticed. Hospitals always noticed when the impossible patient did not explode when the therapist no one fully understood returned from a room with the same still face, and something altered in the atmosphere behind her. At 4 o'clock, Bennett called Claire into his office. He shut the door and stood behind the desk, both hands planted on the wood. He was a polished man, controlled in the way administrators often were when their professionalism depended on never appearing surprised. But surprise sat plain enough in the set of his mouth. "You want to explain what happened yesterday and what happened today." Claire remained standing. A patient in acute identity collapse responded to a direct intervention from trusted military peers and engaged in limited functional work the following morning. Bennett stared at her. "Do not use my own language against me." She held his gaze. He exhaled. "You never disclosed a prior military background. Number. You never thought that mattered. I thought it was dangerous." "For whom?" Claire's jaw tightened. "Both of us." That answer changed something in his face. Not understanding exactly. More like a recognition that the room had a depth he had not measured before. He crossed to the window and looked out over the parking lot where dirty snow sat in low, hard ridges against the curbs. "And now?" "Now he knows enough." Bennett turned back. "You understand that boundaries exist for a reason." "Yes." "And that what happened in the gym this week was not standard." "No," Claire said quietly. It was not. His mouth flattened. Did it help? Claire thought of Logan on the bed with the photograph spread beneath his hand. Of the way his voice had changed when he asked if she would let them in again. Of the tiny, ugly dignity in those two transfers. "Yes," she said. Bennett watched her for a long moment, then nodded once almost reluctantly. "Then I will concern myself with outcomes." She left before either of them had to say anything more honest. The next morning came in under a sky the color of old aluminum. Claire reached the gym before dawn and stood alone in the center of the room listening to the building wake around her. Wheels in the hall, doors opening and closing. Heat clicking through the vents. Somewhere, a nurse laughing too hard at something not funny because fatigue made people generous with bad jokes. She looked at the whiteboard. Usually, it held standard clinical notes, weight-bearing tolerances, transfer goals, core stabilization targets, language designed to survive audits and communicate clearly across a rotating staff. This morning, she took the eraser and cleared it clean. Then she uncapped a black marker and wrote in large block letters, Operation Steadfast. Objective 1. Controlled transfer without assistance. Objective 2. Static weight shift in bars. Objective 3. Upper body load under fatigue. Objective 4. Prosthetic familiarization. Time on target. As long as it takes. She stepped back and looked at it. Ridiculous. Also, the truest thing she had written on that board all month. At 6:10, she unlocked the equipment room and wheeled out the evaluation kit she had requested from orthotics. Clean carbon pylon, trial foot, test socket, fresh liners. She arranged them on a stainless steel tray with the kind of care some people reserved for prayer or weapons maintenance. Riley came in 20 minutes later with coffee in one hand and a breakfast sandwich she had no business carrying onto the therapy floor. She stopped dead when she saw the board. Oh, absolutely not. Claire adjusted a harness strap. Good morning. No, I need context. Why does the gym look like a military briefing room? Because today is not a standard day. That is not context. It is the only version you are getting. Riley moved closer and read the board again. Operation Steadfast. Yes. That is somehow both deeply strange and weirdly effective. Claire looked at her. Riley lifted one hand. For him, not for me. Relax. Claire returned to the harness. You need a filter. I had one. It died during nursing school. By 7:30, the floor had filled out. Transport rolling patients in. Phones starting again. The ordinary machinery of rehab tightening into its daily rhythm. But under all of it, there was a waiting quality in the room. Not the room itself, Claire corrected silently. Her own body. That controlled, sharpened sense that came before anything requiring exactness. At 8:53, Logan came in. He saw the board before he saw her. The chair rolled to a stop near the bars, and for the first time since his arrival, his expression held something new. Suspicion, yes. Offense, certainly. But also unwilling interest. Today, the hoodie was gone. He wore a black thermal shirt with the sleeves pushed to his forearms and hospital athletic shorts. He looked like a man who had slept a little and hated that anyone might notice. Claire crossed to him with the clipboard under one arm. Morning, Chief. His eyes stayed on the board. You cannot be serious. I am serious about everything before 9 a.m. He looked at the tray, then back at the board. Operation Steadfast. Yes, that sounds made up. All operations are made up. His gaze shifted to her at that, and something in the line of his mouth almost gave. She held out the clipboard. Mission parameters. He took it automatically and scanned the page. Short language. Direct. No recovery arc. No reclaiming your future. No brochure words. Just tasks, equipment, thresholds, failure conditions. His eyes stopped on that section. Failure condition 1. Quitting because of anger. Failure. Condition 2. Quitting because of embarrassment. Failure condition 3. Confusing pain with incapacity. Failure condition 4. Lying to your therapist. A sound escaped him. Not a laugh. Closer than anything she had heard yet. You left out insubordination. It is implied. That did it. A fast, rough grin flashed across his mouth and disappeared so quickly Riley nearly dropped a resistance band across the room. Logan shook his head once and handed the clipboard back. This is manipulative. Yes, and condescending. Yes, and probably unethical. Almost certainly. He looked at the bars, then at the tray, then at the board again. I hate that this makes sense. Claire nodded toward the armrests. Then stand up. His hands settled in place. The first stand was uglier than she hoped and better than she expected. Right leg driving hard. Core fighting for alignment. shoulders too active, left side braced in defensive anticipation. He planted both hands on the bars and rose into a trembling one-legged stand with all the grace of a man trying not to let gravity know he feared it. "Hold," Claire said, his glare fixed on the steel rails as if they had insulted him personally. "Load less through the shoulders. I'm not hanging from a helicopter." "Then stop acting like one." He adjusted. Tiny shifts. Better alignment. A breath forced lower. "Good," Claire said. His head snapped toward her. "Do not say good, like I am a dog. Then give me something excellent." He held the position 3 seconds longer before dropping back into the chair, breath rising hard. Riley made a soft, involuntary sound in the corner and immediately pretended she had not. Claire marked the time. Static transfer achieved. Barely. Still counts. He wiped sweat from his temple with the heel of one hand and looked toward the tray. Equipment brief. She rolled it closer. For the first time since his arrival, he looked at the prosthetic components without visible revulsion. Suspicion remained. Distrust remained. But the raw personal offense had thinned. He studied the foot first, then the pylon, then the socket the way he might once have studied hardware. Weight. Function. Failure points. Tolerance. Claire passed the trial foot into his hands. He took it. That exchange changed the room. Not because of what the object was, because of the way he received it. Not as an insult, not as a symbol, as equipment. "This is lighter than I expected," he said. "You are picturing old tech." He ran one thumb along the carbon curve. Response rating. Moderate. Enough give for initial work. Not built for heroics. His mouth twitched again. "That sounds rude." "It is descriptive." He examined the pylon next, then the test socket. His face stayed intent, mind moving, in familiar operational lines. Claire answered every question cleanly. Weight distribution, locking mechanism, alignment tolerance, pressure mapping, failure risks under load, sweat management, socket ride. Marino had been right. Men like Logan respected equipment when it entered the category of mission instead of insult. The trick was not pretending the limb he had lost could be replaced. The trick was giving the new thing a role he could understand without feeling patronized by it. About halfway through the review, he looked up and said quietly, "I am not putting it on today." Claire met his eyes. Today is familiarization. Relief crossed his face before he could kill it. He hated that too. They worked another 40 minutes without spectacle. He completed 3 transfers, 1 seated core series and an upper body circuit he finished mostly out of spite. By the last set, his shoulders were shaking and his breath had roughened into the sound of real effort. He dropped the handle and leaned back in the chair. Mission complete. Claire checked the sheet. Mission ongoing. He closed his eyes briefly. That feels about right. That afternoon, his phone rang during a rest block. Claire saw the screen light up where it sat on the tray table. Pike. He looked at the name, stared for a beat too long, then answered. "Yeah." Claire busied herself with the harness straps and pretended not to hear. His side of the conversation stayed sparse. Number. "Yes." "Torres should be supervised." A pause. "No, I am not better." Another pause. Then his expression changed by a degree Claire had begun to notice mattered. "Fine," he said. I stood. A longer silence. I said stood, do not get theatrical about it. When he ended the call, he did not put the phone face down. He left it where it was. Claire noted that and said nothing. The days developed a rhythm after that. Not smooth, never smooth, real. Effort followed by anger. Progress followed by backlash. One good morning giving way to a sleepless night of phantom pain that left him pale and foul-tempered by dawn. One clean transfer followed by a humiliating stumble when the hip locked up and the body refused all negotiations. He cursed often and with invention. He accused the socket of being designed by sadists. He informed the bars on 3 separate occasions that they offended him on principle. Claire let him complain exactly as long as the complaint remained information. The second it became avoidance, she cut through it. On a Thursday morning, he misjudged a pivot, lost the angle, and went down hard to one knee and one palm on the mat. The whole gym inhaled. Pain flashed across his face, bright and involuntary. He slapped the mat once with his hand. Fantastic. Claire crouched nearby, not touching him. Can you get leverage? He glared at the floor. Do not narrate me. Can you get leverage? A beat? No. Find another angle. His head jerked up. That is your clinical brilliance right now. If the ground can keep you, she said evenly, then so can every other bad thing that put you there. The line hit him like a slap. His jaw tightened. His eyes went briefly murderous. Then he rolled, planted, both hands dragged his weight toward the bar and hauled himself back upright with a sound ripped straight out of the center of him. The gym breathed again. Claire rose with him, there. He stood swaying between the rails, furious and alive. I hate you. No, you do not. He kept staring straight ahead. Breath hard. Sweat at his temples. Pain burning through every line in his body. After a long second, he said no. It was the first time he admitted it. Not trust yet, not even close. But the war between them had changed species. By the third week, he was strong enough for his first true socket fitting. The orthotist arrived at 9 sharp with careful hands, professional optimism, and the kind of tone Logan usually disliked on sight. Claire headed off trouble by keeping the room functional from the start. No speeches, no celebration. Liner first. Skin check, load tolerance, pressure mapping. Logan sat on the edge of the mat table with the residual limb bare under the harsh gym light face, closed hands braced on either side of him. The room had quieted around the work without anyone formally asking it to. Claire stayed close enough to watch his expression without crowding it. Any sharp pain you say it, she told him. He gave her a look. I'm going to say many things. Make at least one of them useful. The liner went on. Then the socket. The first contact changed his face, not because of catastrophic pain, because of strangeness. Pressure where there should have been absence. Force traveling through a route his body did not trust yet. The brutal, intimate wrongness of being held by something that was not flesh. He went pale under it. Torres, who had appeared 20 minutes earlier with contraband coffee and entirely too much satisfaction at being allowed back in the building, leaned against the far wall and said, You know, this still looks less unpleasant than jump training. Logan turned his head and stared at him with exhausted venom. I hope you choke, C. Torres said. That is the healthiest you have sounded all week. A couple of the younger patients laughed. Even Riley did. The laughter broke the pressure just enough for Logan to remain in the socket another 2 minutes instead of ripping it off immediately. That was how progress happened. Not in noble leaps. In mean little increments earned by sweat irritation language and the refusal of certain people to let a man disappear behind his own anger. The first time he bore full weight through the prosthetic, the room seemed to narrow around the act. He stood between the bars, both hands gripping steel. Claire on his left, Riley behind with the gate belt, the orthotist near the tray. Torres at the wall, quiet now. Pike in the doorway, having arrived without fanfare and taken up space in the room without speaking. Shift, Claire said. Logan shifted. The carbon foot met the floor and took him. His body trembled as every instinct screamed against trusting what was not flesh. The socket loaded. The pylon answered. Weight passed where weight had not passed since the blast. His breath caught. Again, Claire said. He did it. Right side, left side, center, left. The room had gone so still the heater turning on in the vents sounded loud. When he finally sat back down, there were tears in his eyes and fury all over his face because of them. Claire marked the time on the clipboard and said nothing. After a beat, Pike spoke from the doorway. That is one hell of a thing. Logan did not answer. He was looking at the prosthetic with the expression of a man seeing not peace, not acceptance, but possibility. And possibility was often harder to bear than grief because it required participation. Claire handed him a towel. He wiped his face and looked at her. It felt wrong. Yes, and right. Yes. His mouth moved once. That is deeply irritating. That is normal. This time he did not argue. Word spread through Chesapeake Mercy in the quiet, inevitable way stories spread through buildings full of wounded people. Chief Hale stood in the bars. Chief Hale tolerated the socket. Chief Hale answered his phone. Chief Hale laughed once when Torres almost got thrown out by security for bringing in Cuban food. By the 4th week, other patients had begun watching him whether he wanted them to or not. Some watched because progress gave them something to measure their own against. Some watched because they recognized the look in his face from their own mirrors. Some watched because they had heard him explode in the gym and later seen him standing anyway. The first patient who forced the issue was a 19-year-old Marine named Travis Bell. He had arrived with a new prosthetic arm he refused to touch. He let clinicians strap it on, then sat with dead eyes and a locked jaw, while people around him used phrases like adaptation and future function. On day 3, he refused therapy entirely. Claire found him in the day room with the prosthetic on the table in front of him like evidence. She opened her mouth to speak. Logan got there first. He crossed the room on the temporary leg with his cane in one hand and that slow, controlled gait of a man still negotiating every treaty with gravity. He stopped opposite Travis and nodded at the prosthetic. "You planning to use that?" Travis glared, "No." Logan lowered himself into the chair across from him. Solid strategy. The kid scowled harder. "You here to motivate me?" "Number. Then what?" "Hate it on your own time," Logan said. "Use it anyway." Travis blinked. "That is supposed to help." "No, it is supposed to be true." The boy looked down at the arm again. "Feels fake." Logan tapped his own prosthetic once with the cane. "It is fake. That is not the relevant question." Travis looked up slowly. "Then what is?" Logan leaned back. "Whether you want to let fake keep you from becoming useful." No clinician in the building would have chosen that word. Useful. Claire watched the room change around it. So did Travis. So did Riley from the chart desk 20 feet away, eyes widening in silent recognition of what she was seeing. The boy stared at the prosthetic another long moment, then reached for it. Afterward, Riley cornered Claire by the sink. "He is good at that," she whispered. Claire rinsed her hands. "Yes, that feels medically inconvenient. Healing usually is." As spring edged the worst of winter out of Norfolk, Logan's place in the building changed. Not all at once. Not ceremonially. In the small practical ways that meant more than ceremony ever did. Staff began seeking his read on younger patients who would not engage. Patients started timing their own bar work to overlap with his. Torres came by twice a week and acted like the whole hospital belonged to him. Pike appeared less often, but always when it mattered. Marino arrived rarely, and somehow left a stronger impression each time than men who talked for hours. One afternoon, Marino stood near the prosthetic tray while Claire adjusted alignment on Logan's socket and asked, in that low, unreadable voice, "Weakest point under stress." Claire answered without looking up. "Interface fit. If the socket rides wrong, everything downstream compensates." Marino nodded once, same as bad armor. Logan, gripping the bars, snorted. "You compare everything to armor." "Because I know how to respect equipment," Marino said. Logan shot him a look. "I do respect it." Marino's eyes moved once to the prosthetic, then back to Logan's face. "Then stop looking at it like it insulted your bloodline." Claire bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. Logan saw that and looked offended enough to be almost funny. By early March, he no longer needed the chair on the floor. He still used it for longer transport days and after difficult fittings, but in the gym he moved with cane bars and a growing hard-won intelligence about his own mechanics. Not grace yet. Competence. Which meant more. One Friday evening, after the last patient had cleared out, Claire found him sitting alone on the edge of the parallel bars with the prosthetic offliner rolled halfway down, cane resting beside him. The windows had gone dark enough to mirror the room back at itself. Outside, city lights reflected on the river in broken lines. "You should be home," he said without turning. "So should you." He looked down at the prosthetic foot on the mat. "I keep waiting for it to feel less strange." "It does." He shook his head. No, I mean inside. Claire leaned against the nearest bar. For a few seconds they listened to the building settle into evening. The hum of lights. Distant elevator bell. A cart rolling somewhere far down the hall. Then Logan said, "The leg gets easier. The part where I am still me gets harder." That honesty deserved honesty back. "It gets different before it gets easier," Claire said. He considered the line as if testing it for structural weakness. After a while, he asked, "You ever miss the old version of yourself enough to get angry at the new one?" Every day, Claire thought. Instead, she said yes. He looked at her then. Not as a patient. Not even only as another veteran. Something narrower and rarer than that. One wounded professional recognizing the exact grain of another person's scar. On the desk across the room, her notes waited. Outcome measures. Load tolerances. Session summaries. Hard evidence that what had begun as one furious man refusing a future was becoming something else entirely. Logan lifted the prosthetic foot and rested it across his knee. "Pike thinks I should start helping more formally with some of the new guys." Claire kept her face unreadable. "Do you want to?" He thought about it. Really thought. "I want to see if I can." She looked at him in the reflected dark. The anger had not left him. The grief had not vanished. The phantom pain would not stop just because he had learned to stand. But underneath it all, around it all, something stronger now held the room. Direction. Claire nodded once, then see. He adjusted the strap in his hands. You know, for a woman who claims she does not sell hope, you hand out a dangerous amount of it. Claire looked toward the window. "No," she said softly. "I hand out work. Hope just likes to ride in the same truck." That time he laughed for real. Low, brief, alive. His laugh did not last long, but the sound stayed in the room after it ended. Outside, winter loosened its grip on Norfolk one cold finger at a time. Dirty snow disappeared from the curbs. The river changed from sheet metal gray to a darker, cleaner blue. By late March, the wind off the water still bit hard, but it no longer felt like a threat. It felt like weather again. Inside Chesapeake Mercy, Logan Hale stopped moving through the building like a man waiting to be erased. He still had bad mornings. Claire trusted him more because of that. There were days when phantom pain cut through him before breakfast and left his face colorless by 9. Days when the socket fit rode wrong, and every step reminded him that adaptation was not restoration. Days when one careless comment from a resident or one look of pity from a stranger could sour the whole hour. But those things stopped being the only story in the room. By April, he was walking the short side of the rehab floor with no cane on his best days. By May, he was doing supervised peer support with new arrivals who did not respond to polished reassurance. By June, the impossible patient had become the one younger staff quietly pointed to when another combat amputee came in too angry to listen to anybody with a badge and a clipboard. It happened gradually enough that nobody could point to the exact day the change became official. One Tuesday morning, Claire stepped out of the supply room carrying compression sleeves and found Logan sitting across from a young Army sergeant named Ben Holloway. Ben had lost his right leg in Mosul and had spent 3 straight sessions refusing the prosthetic with the kind of dead stare Claire recognized instantly. His body sat in the chair. The rest of him looked as if it had retreated somewhere farther back. The prosthetic rested on the mat between them. Claire stayed in the doorway and did not interrupt. Ben pointed at the leg. "That thing is not mine." Logan sat with his own sports liner rolled to the knee, carbon foot crossed over his good ankle, like the equipment belonged there because it did. "No," he said. "And your boots were not your feet." Ben frowned. "That is different." "It is not." The younger man looked away. Logan let him. He had learned that from Claire. Space offered at the right moment was not retreat, it was respect. When he spoke again, his voice had gone lower. "You get to hate it. Nobody in this building is trying to take that from you. But hate and use are not opposites. Learn that early, and your life gets bigger." Ben looked at him. "Yours bigger now." Logan considered the question before answering. Different, he said. Bigger on the good days. That was enough. Ben reached for the prosthetic. Claire moved on without entering the room. She knew when a moment belonged to the people inside it, and not to the person who had made it possible. By the end of June, Dr. Bennett had stopped pretending Logan's effect on the floor was accidental. The informal peer support work became a pilot program with sign-and-sheet supervision notes, and exactly the kind of administrative language that made Riley suspicious on principle. "This is how they ruin things," Riley muttered one afternoon, leaning over the chart desk with a coffee she had forgotten to drink. Claire kept writing, by documenting them, by naming them. The second people in offices start saying phrases like program outcomes. Someone is going to kill the soul of it with a spreadsheet. Claire signed the page. "You are dramatic." "I am observant." She was both. Still the pilot held. Logan did not become soft. That was one reason it worked. He sat with men who hated the chair, hated the socket, hated the dependents, and never once told them they would feel inspired if they just gave healing a chance. He talked about leverage, friction, skin breakdown, pride, shame, the difference between pain and incapacity. He used the language they trusted, not because it was gentler, because it was honest. Nora Pierce arrived on a Thursday, carrying a file and a winter weight of composure, even though spring had already taken hold outside. Claire had seen her name before. Former Army captain, transition counselor contracted through the VA, trauma work, legal advocacy, medically retired, strong outcomes, the kind of resume that looked orderly on paper and had probably been purchased through fire. Nora stepped into the rehab gym wearing a dark green coat over civilian clothes that looked expensive without trying to. Dark hair pinned low at the nape. A face composed enough to make most men assume softness had never been a relevant category. She watched Logan finish a turn in the bars before speaking. "He looks like a man trying to negotiate with gravity." Logan turned his head and squinted at her. "And you look like you wandered into the wrong room." The corners of her mouth lifted. "This is the peer support observation block." Sounds invented. Most useful things are. Claire looked from one to the other and kept her face still. Nora crossed the gym with unhurried confidence and held out a hand once Logan sat back down. "Nora Pierce." He looked at her hand, then took it. "Logan Hale." "I know. That should bother me more." "It would if I were less useful." That got his attention. Riley, sorting therapy putty at the far table, nearly dropped a tray. Nora stayed for the rest of the session and said little. She had the rare skill of making silence feel like focus instead of absence. When Logan finished his final pass and dropped into the chair irritated because the left turn had gone sloppy under fatigue, she spoke again. "You carry yourself like a man who thinks surviving was the lesser achievement." Logan looked up sharply. Nora held the stare without blinking. "That may be your first mistake." Then she thanked Claire, collected her file, and left. Logan watched the door for a second longer than necessary. Riley drifted close to Claire and whispered, "Well, that was not subtle." Claire kept her eyes on the clipboard. "Get back to work." "I am at work. I am also alive." Nora became part of the architecture of the place after that. Not with fanfare, in the way solid people do when they stop by twice a week, then 3 times, then suddenly belong to the rhythm of the building. She ran transition sessions for wounded veterans preparing to leave inpatient care. She handled family meetings no one else wanted. She spoke to insurance representatives with a tone that could remove bark from trees. She wore civilian elegance like armor and moved through the hospital with the controlled balance of someone whose body had once had to relearn trust, too. Claire learned pieces of her history in fragments. Convoy blast in Kandahar, shoulder rebuilt with metal, temporary hearing loss in one ear, a short and bitter season in law school before she abandoned statute books for counseling because some wounds did not care whether their paperwork was correct. Logan Nossier. Well before he admitted it. His sarcasm sharpened when she entered a room. His shoulders aligned an inch straighter. On days she joined the peer group, he stayed afterward under weak excuses and argued with her about policy football command structures and whether hospital coffee qualified as an ethical violation. Nora gave as good as she got, and generally more. One evening, Claire looked up from charting and saw them standing by the riverside windows after hours. Logan had his cane in one hand and that rough, tired look on his face that usually meant the socket had been punishing him all day. Nora held 2 paper cups of coffee. She said something Claire could not hear. He took 1 cup. Their hands brushed. Neither pretended not to notice. Claire dropped her eyes back to the chart and kept writing. Summer settled over Norfolk in bright heat and wet air. Chesapeake Mercy smelled different then. Less like winter coats and radiator dust. More like sunscreen from family visits. Overworked air conditioning coffee turned stale too quickly, and the faint salt rot that drifted inland from the harbor if the doors opened too often. By August, the pilot program was no longer a pilot. It had become a permanent line item with administrative support and too many meetings. Claire sat through some of those meetings in severe blouses and practical shoes, while hospital directors from facilities she had never set foot in used phrases like scalable trauma transition model and cross-site replication. She answered in the language systems respected: patient engagement, identity reconstruction, peer-specific compliance gains, restoration of self-efficacy. Then she went downstairs and watched Logan explain to a 20-year-old courseman why shame felt noble only because it asked nothing useful of him. That was the real data. Riley noticed Claire's fatigue before anyone else did. "You hate the meetings," she said one afternoon while they restocked the locker room. "I hate fluorescent conference rooms with catered sandwiches. That is not the same thing." Claire folded a towel with more precision than the towel deserved. "No." Riley watched her a second. "You are good there too, you know." "Where?" "In the rooms upstairs, with all the polished people trying to sound intelligent about pain." Claire set the towel down. "That is not a compliment." "It absolutely is." What Riley meant, and what Claire knew, was that Chesapeake Mercy had changed her in the same year she had been changing it. She had come to the place determined to be useful without being known. Somewhere along the way, the utility had worked itself into something bigger. Not softer. Bigger. The offer arrived in October. Bennett called her into his office on a mild afternoon, while leaves scraped the sidewalks outside, and the river flashed clean under a rare blue sky. He handed her a folder. "Read." Claire opened it. Deputy Director, Virginia Veteran Trauma Transition Services. Statewide oversight across inpatient rehab partnerships. Combat injury transition planning. Peer support implementation. Rural access integration. New funding. Larger staff, more reach. Less floor time. She looked up. Bennett had gone to stand by the window with both hands in his pockets. "They want you." Claire read the first page again. Salary, department size, authority, scope. The kind of role people spent whole careers angling toward if ambition was the axis they trusted. "This would take me off the floor. Most of the time." She closed the folder. "Then why would I want it?" Bennett turned back. "Because there are hospitals in this state trying to do what we do here with half the resources and none of the structure. Because what you built should not depend on geography. Because if it only works when you are standing in the room, then it is not big enough yet." Claire looked out the window at the river. A tug moved slowly toward open water, leaving a narrow wake behind it. "Who replaces me?" "No one," Bennett said. "We will train too and adapt." That answer oddly made it easier to breathe. She took the folder home and left it unopened on the kitchen table for 2 days, even though she had already read every page. She walked around it, slept badly, ignored 2 calls from Richmond, then accepted on a Friday night while standing at the sink in the dark with city light reflected in the glass. The next Monday she told Bennett. On Wednesday she told Riley, who burst into tears before Claire had finished the second sentence, and then got angry at herself for doing it. "This is manipulative," Riley said, swiping at her face with the heel of one hand. "Yes," Claire said. You could have at least waited until I was wearing waterproof mascara. I did not know you owned any." Riley laughed and cried harder. The younger staff took it badly. The older staff took it with practiced grace and visible disappointment. The patients who knew her well enough to hear the news did what wounded people often did when someone important to their routine announced departure. They became extremely interested in pretending it was not happening. Logan reacted by going quiet. Not hostile, not cold. Quiet in a narrower way than before because the silence now had weight rather than emptiness. He came in for his outpatient review that week wearing dark jeans and a charcoal coat, the carbon leg hidden cleanly beneath tailored fabric, no cane in sight. The first time Claire had seen him, he wore his body like an insult. Now he carried it like equipment that had demanded terms and earned respect. She found him after the session by the gym windows, both hands in his coat pockets looking out at the river. "You are angry," she said. He did not turn immediately. "I am evaluating." That sounds like anger with better vocabulary. A small line appeared at the corner of his mouth. Not enough to count as a smile. When he did look at her, she saw the rest of it. Not anger, loss. "Norfolk keeps removing my favorite people from buildings," he said. Claire folded her arms. "I am not dying." Still feels rude. Something moved in her chest, tender enough to hurt. "You have my number," she said. He looked faintly offended. "The one time does not define me." The one time lasted 3 weeks. He exhaled, low blow. Then more quietly, "I know it is right. I just do not enjoy it." Neither did she. Nora came in later that same afternoon, carrying a bakery box from downtown and a file under one arm. She set the box on the desk and kissed Logan once on the cheek, as if that had been happening long enough not to require explanation. Riley saw it and walked directly into a supply cart. Claire pretended not to. By then, the shape of their relationship had become visible to anybody paying attention. They moved around each other like two disciplined storms. No theatrical declarations. No easy public softness. Just the sort of intimacy built by people who understood the cost of disclosure and chose it anyway, one careful piece at a time. Autumn turned colder. Days shortened. The river darkened earlier. By the time Claire's last week arrived, Chesapeake Mercy had already begun the odd internal rearrangement institutions perform when someone central is about to leave. Meetings got scheduled around her more carefully. People lingered in her doorway under weak pretexts. Bennett became irritatingly formal whenever he was trying not to be sincere. Riley collected emotional ammunition in the form of old stories and deployed them at random moments in hopes of making Claire laugh. Her last shift fell in late November. She worked the full day because anything else would have embarrassed her. Morning rounds, chart review, a family consult. One brutal insurance call she won by going very still and asking for a supervisor in a tone that made the line go silent. Final handoff notes for the 2 therapists who would inherit her programs. One more session in the gym, one more walk through the supply room, one more check of the prosthetic tray, as if exactness could hold back time if she performed it carefully enough. At 5:40, she returned to her office, switched on the lamp instead of the overhead light, and began packing the small life she had built there into a cardboard box. The black travel mug, a framed staff photo Riley had bullied her into taking part in. 3 notebooks full of private shorthand only she could fully read. An envelope from Bennett she did not open. The St. Michael medal from the bottom drawer. And finally, after a long pause, the photograph from Iraq she had spent years keeping face down, because there were periods in a life when surviving and remembering did not feel compatible. She put on her coat, lifted the box, and turned off the light. The hallway outside was quieter than usual. Evening shift had taken over. The gym stood dim beyond the glass bars shining under low fluorescence. Somewhere down the hall, a television laughed too loudly from a patient room. Somewhere above, an elevator bell chimed. Claire rode down alone. The doors opened onto the front entrance, and the security guard looked up with the solemn expression people reserved for departing staff and funerals. The city beyond the glass was all rain and black pavement. Then 3 black SUVs rolled to the curb. Engines cut. The guard straightened. Claire stopped walking. The doors opened, and 3 men stepped out in dark peacoats over civilian clothes, moving with the same quiet precision that had altered this building months earlier. Pike in the middle, gray, at the temples, broad-shouldered and steady as ever. Marino, to one side, elegant and dangerous enough to look born for rooms where people lied carefully. Torres, on the other, younger, sharper, carrying something flat and velvet cased under one arm. The lobby turned toward them in one collective motion. A young nurse at reception whispered, "Who are those guys?" Pike came through the doors first, rain beating on his collar. His eyes found Claire immediately. His posture shifted on instinct. "Ma'am," he said. The word landed in the center of the room with full weight. Not rank alone, recognition. Claire adjusted the box in her arms. "You are all extremely dramatic." Torres grinned. "You say that like it is a flaw. What are you doing here?" Pike glanced at the box, then back at her. "Chief Hale asked us to make sure we reached you before you escaped." A pulse moved in her throat. Marino stepped forward and took the box from her hands without asking. He set it on the reception counter with such smooth certainty that even the guard looked too intimidated to object. Torres held out the velvet case. Claire opened it. Inside lay a heavy challenge coin against black cloth. One side bore the trident. The other carried an engraving cut so deep the letters cast small shadows of their own. "For bringing our brother back to us. For reminding him he was never gone." For one suspended second, the whole lobby disappeared. Pike's voice softened, though not by much. "Unit gift." Claire touched the coin with one thumb. It was warm from Torres's hand. "You should not have done this," she said. Marino's expression barely moved. That was never an option. The front doors opened again. Another figure stepped inside through the rain. Logan. Dark suit. White shirt open at the throat. No chair. No cane. The line of the prosthetic hidden cleanly beneath the tailoring, visible only if you knew where to look and had once studied every inch of that journey. Nora came in beside him in a wine-colored coat, rain caught in her dark hair. She moved close enough to him that loyalty and affection showed without display. The whole lobby watched them. Logan crossed the floor with the steady measured gait Claire knew down to the inch. When he stopped in front of her, neither of them spoke for 1 beat, then 2. He held out an envelope. Claire took it and opened the flap. Inside was an invitation on thick cream stalk. "Logan Hale and Nora Pierce request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony." There was a second card tucked behind it. Handwritten, black ink. "You got me to the door. You do not get to miss me walking through it." Claire looked up too quickly. Her throat had gone tight without warning. Nora smiled first because of course she did. She stepped in and kissed Claire's cheek, elegant and warm and entirely unsentimental despite the tenderness of the gesture. "He wanted to mail it," Nora said. Logan looked mildly offended. "I objected. I was overruled." "That is the same thing Torres said." "Confirmed," Pike added. Even Marino looked close to amused. Claire closed the invitation carefully. "You planned this." Nora lifted one shoulder. "I prefer precision." Logan's eyes stayed on Claire's face. "You told me service did not end." It changed shape. Rain tapped softly against the glass behind him. He went on, voice rougher now. "So did yours." Before Claire could answer, the front doors opened yet again, and 2 new wounded veterans came in from the curb under the hard wash of fluorescent light. One wore a fresh shoulder sling and had the white, pinched face of someone trying not to throw up from pain. The other was younger, leaner, staring straight ahead with a closed-off fury Claire recognized from 20 feet away. The intake nurse moved toward them. So did Claire on instinct. Then she stopped. Because this was her last shift. Because the intake nurse knew her job. Because the work did not end when one person stepped out of a building. She looked back at Logan and Nora and Pike and Torres and Marino. At the startled receptionist. At the younger nurses trying and failing not to stare. At the challenge coin in her hand and the invitation resting against the old photograph in the open box on the counter. For a moment, Chesapeake Mercy seemed to gather all its versions of her in one place. The woman who had first arrived determined never to let her past step through the door. The therapist who learned to name grief without flinching. The officer no one in the building had known until one broken man forced the truth into daylight. Claire slipped the coin into her coat pocket and tucked the invitation into the box. "Tell the church not to start without me," she said. Nora's mouth curved, as if we could. Torres moved to push the door open for her. Pike stepped aside in that old courtly way men like him reserved for women they respected enough not to overdo it. Marino reached for the handle of the box again, and this time Claire let him take it because some gestures were not about weakness. They were about being claimed by people who understood what carrying alone had cost. Outside, the harbor wind came sharp and wet off the water. Claire stood on the front steps of Chesapeake Mercy one last time and looked back through the glass. Inside, the new patients were already being rolled toward intake under the bright hospital lights. Staff moved around them. Papers changed hands. Somebody bent to speak softly to the younger one. The work continued exactly as it should. Logan came to stand beside her Nora on his other side. Pike, Torres, and Marino spread out behind them in the instinctive loose formation of men who had once learned to watch a perimeter even in ordinary weather. For a few seconds none of them spoke. Traffic hissed over the wet street. A distant siren rose and faded. Somewhere downriver, a horn sounded low across the dark. Claire lifted her face into the cold rain and breathed. Then she turned toward the waiting SUVs, toward Richmond, toward rural clinics and underfunded wards and the next generation of impossible men and women who would need language sharp enough to cut through shame and hands steady enough not to let go too soon. Marino opened the rear door for her. She paused with one hand on the frame and looked back once more at Chesapeake Mercy. Not goodbye, just acknowledgement. Then she got in the coin warm in her pocket, the invitation resting against old metal in the box at her feet, and the convoy pulled away from the curb with the smooth, dark grace of something that had come not to end a story but to honor the shape it had taken.